Furry alien girl thought she was the DEATHWORLDER, until she met the human. The humid air of the dense alien rainforest clings to them both like a living thing, heavy with the scent of strange blossoms and damp earth. The only sounds are the drip of condensation off immense leaves and the quiet rasp of their breathing. She stands with her back to a colossal trunk veined with phosphorescent fungi, head tilted in challenge, those feline ears twitching at the faintest whisper of movement. He faces her, blade in hand but not yet raised, eyes narrowed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Neither moves. It's as if the forest itself is holding its breath, waiting for one or the other to strike. She slowly lifts her chin. You think, "That knife makes you dangerous, human." The words come out low, laced with contempt, vibrating in a frequency that sets his nerves on edge. A heartbeat passes before Cain responds. His lips part, but he says nothing yet, letting the tension coil. He can feel her eyes tracking the subtle shift of his shoulders, reading potential weakness, but all she finds is a coiled readiness. The moment stretches taut, and he can taste the primal challenge hovering between them. With an almost imperceptible flick of her ear, she exhales, but it's not a sigh of resignation, more like a prelude to violence. He takes a slow step forward, not answering her taunt in words, but pressing into her space. She does not retreat. Instead, she tips her head, those dark curls brushing her bare shoulders, and smirks. They both understand this is no casual encounter. These jungle ruins, half swallowed by moss and vines, have served as a crucible for death. Cain has fought his way through entire platoons, hunting a rumor, a whisper of a super soldier rumored to be prowling this death world. He never expected to find her, a lithe, feral presence who radiates lethal grace. There's a raw confidence in the way she stands, as if his blade doesn't concern her at all. She lunges first, a flash of movement. He raises his arm just in time, steel kissing the edge of her forearm. Yet she swivels her hips, avoids the slash with an acrobatic twist, and slams her elbow into his ribs. The impact is like a hammer, forcing his breath out in a grunt. He staggers, but it's a fleeting moment. His free hand locks around her wrist, yanking her off balance. She twists to escape, muscles bunching beneath tawny skin, but he doesn't let go. They stand locked, eye to eye, chests heaving, the taste of conflict electric in the air. Let me go. Her words resonate, stirring something in him he can't quite name. He waits a second longer, savoring the bristling defiance in her voice, the impossible magnetism pouring off her. Slowly he releases her wrist. She takes a step back, but doesn't flee. Instead, she lifts her chin again, eyes flicking to the knife in his hand. He twirls it once, letting the motion show how accustomed he is to violence. She doesn't look impressed. If anything, she looks intrigued. He finally answers, "You're not half as frightening as the stories claim." It's a deliberate push, his voice cool and flat, testing her reaction. Her pupils narrow. Close, he can see the intricate swirl of color there, a coppery gold that almost glows in the half-light. The pointed ears atop her head press forward, as though capturing every nuance of his tone. She looks as if she might spring on him again, but instead she just smiles, exposing the tips of canines that appear unnervingly sharp. "Stories," she repeats, her voice a low purr. "You think you know me from rumors and half-baked legends? Humans always think they've read enough files or heard enough tall tales to hold the leash. Let's see who's on the leash by the end of the night." He registers the subtle shift of her weight, the flex of her thighs. She's preparing to move again, possibly to kill him. Yet even with that knowledge, a part of him, some dark piece of his psyche that thrives on challenge, admits he's never been this alive. She darts to the side, agile as a hunting cat, and he pivots, forearm up, bracing for impact. They collide in a flurry of limbs, the clash of flesh on flesh echoing around them. Vines tear from the trunk as Saria yanks him sideways, hooking a leg behind his knee to drop him. He resists with brutal efficiency, hooking an arm around her waist. Her breath hitches. There's a feral light in her eyes, some mixture of anger and exhilaration. She wrenches free and they separate again, each breathing hard. A distant crash reverberates through the jungle, reminding them they are not alone on this planet. Something else, multiple somethings, roam these trees. Cain glances toward the sound, then back at her. He notices the way her ears flatten slightly. In that second, her gaze flickers from lethal to calculating, As if by silent agreement, they lower their weapons a fraction. The tension between them doesn't subside. If anything, it simmers hotter, like embers waiting for the next spark. But practical survival trumps personal vendettas, at least for the moment. She breathes out, the corners of her lips still curved. In a mocking half-smile, "You came looking for me. I hope you're prepared to pay the cost." His expression remains stony, but inside a war rages between caution and a strange fascination. He's never met a creature who moves quite like her, who fights with such fluid intent. Her brash confidence dares him to break her. His own ingrained discipline demands he either subdue or eliminate her. Yet neither of them is willing to make the killing blow, not yet. They stand at an impasse. Unspoken agreement forms. The pounding of unseen predators in the distance demands they move, and quickly. Saria takes a step, brushing past him, the heat of her body unsettlingly pleasant against his arm. Kane follows without question, though it rankles. He's not used to trailing behind anyone, especially not an alien rumored to be the deadliest inhabitant of this cursed planet. She moves in silence, navigating the labyrinth of giant roots and glowing fungi as though born to it, which he supposes might be true. Their footsteps mingle with the hiss of insects and the rustling canopy overhead. Each time he breathes, he catches her scent, an odd mix of metallic tang and something sweetly feral that prickles memory and desire all at once. He grits his teeth, focusing on keeping pace. Eventually she crouches beside a boulder half buried in moss. She gestures for him to approach. He hovers, silent, scanning the environment for threats. When none reveal themselves, he glances down at her. She meets his gaze without flinching. "We can't stay exposed. The creatures out there won't spare you because you're human." Her tone is still laced with challenge, but beneath it, there's an edge of something else. Urgency, maybe. He kneels beside her, conscious of how close they are, her bare arm nearly brushing his. She points at a natural overhang nearby, where the rocky face of the terrain forms a half-sheltered nook. "Move," she orders. He stiffens, but stands, and follows, half expecting her to attempt another surprise attack. She doesn't. The nook is cramped, forcing them to squeeze inside. Cool stone scrapes against his shoulders, and the scent of damp earth envelops them. She presses a palm against the inside of the rock, and to his surprise a faint shimmer of hidden technology flickers, sealing them inside. Now it's just the two of them in claustrophobic darkness. He can hear her breathing, low and steady, sense the heat radiating off her body. Something about the small space intensifies the pounding of his heart. She doesn't look at him, only at the glow from a hidden device she's tinkering with. Pale green light washes over her features, illuminating the curve of her neck, the stubborn set of her jaw, those large ears swiveling to track even the faintest noise. "That should keep the crawlers out for a bit," she mutters. Then though just remembering his presence, she fixes him with a level stare. "I still owe you for that knife swing." He huffs a short laugh, a humorless sound that echoes off the stone. "Funny. I was about to say the same regarding your elbow." Her lip curls. Despite the dimness, he can see the slight part of her lips, the way her nostrils flare as if scenting his anger, or his interest. His own adrenaline still spikes from the earlier fight, and in this cramped shelter, the tension becomes almost unbearable. He keeps his distance as best he can, pressing his back to the rock. She does the same on the opposite side. There's maybe a foot of space between them, if that. When she moves her leg, it brushes against his, and he feels a jolt of awareness shoot through him. She acts as though she doesn't notice, but the flick of her ear suggests otherwise. His jaw tightens. He won't allow his body to betray him this easily. Minutes pass in fraught silence. Outside, the forest roars and screeches as night predators awaken, filling the darkness with snarls and shrieks. The barrier Saria activated hums faintly. Then she speaks again, her voice hushed. "You really think you stand a chance on this? Plan it without me." He doesn't answer right away, ignoring the provocation, but she leans in, pressing just a bit closer, forcing him to look into those glowing eyes. "Everyone who's come here hoping to tame me has died. What makes you different?" The seductive lilt in her voice is unmistakable. Is she testing him or genuinely curious? Probably both. He exhales. I'm not here to tame you. A lie, or at least a partial one. He came to capture her, drag her back as proof he can accomplish the impossible. But the truth is shifting in his mind. The more he sees her fight, the more he recognizes that no chain could hold her. Some part of him, even as it unsettles him, respects that. She's a living blade, honed to lethal perfection, and like a blade, she might just slice through him if he isn't careful. There's a flicker of expression in her eyes that might be amusement. Then why are you here? Her voice wraps around him in the dark. He sets his jaw. I have orders, he says simply, as if that explains everything. The truth is more personal, but he won't give her the satisfaction of knowing he seeks revenge for his dead squad mates, men and women, who tried to subdue her only to vanish into this jungle. He's the last one left, the only one who refused to accept their fate as a cautionary tale. She studies him, and he senses that her next words will be a provocation. She never misses an opening to needle him, to remind him who holds the advantage on this planet. But before she can speak, the faint hum outside rises in pitch. Something large skitters across the barrier, scraping against invisible energy. Sarya's ears flatten, and she shifts, placing a hand on the hilt of a curved blade at her hip. Kane grips his knife. Suddenly, the notion of continuing their personal duel seems trivial compared to the threat just beyond their flimsy shield. They share a look, a silent agreement to postpone their fight. Survival first, vendettas second. She mouths a single word. Quiet. He nods, pressing his back firmly to the rock, focusing on steadying his breathing. The thing outside sniffs around, letting out a guttural hiss. From the corner of his eye, Kine can see Sarya's slight tension, how her muscles bunch. She's prepared to spring at any moment. Minutes drag like hours. Eventually, with a sharp clack, the beast moves on, leaving only an echo of its presence. Sarya exhales slowly, though she doesn't relax. Neither does he. They remain in silence until the night grows quiet again. Only then does Sarya reach for the device that's creating the barrier, turning it off with a swift tap. We move, she says. He nods. No argument. Outside, the jungle is even darker than before, the glowing fungi providing ghostly illumination. She leads, he follows, knife at the ready, eyes scanning every shadow. The minutes stretch into an hour or more as they navigate twisted paths, climbing over fallen trunks and wading through tangles of luminescent vines. Despite his training, Kane finds it increasingly difficult to ignore her presence. She slips through the forest with an uncanny ease, her body language in constant flux, predatory and graceful, never letting him forget she could gut him in a heartbeat. Yet there's something about the set of her shoulders that intrigues him. It suggests a burden, perhaps a wariness that runs deeper than just suspicion of an outsider. She never reveals it overtly, but he catches the subtle signs in how tightly she grips her blade, how often her eyes flick to the canopy above. When she stops abruptly, he almost runs into her. Before he can ask why, she kneels, pressing a hand to the ground. Her ears twitch and she cocks her head, listening. He can hear nothing except the faint stirrings of nocturnal life, but clearly she senses something more. He wonders if it's her advanced hearing or some other alien sense that warns her of danger. She shoots him a glare that says, "Don't make a sound." He swallows the urge to speak, dropping into a crouch beside her, scanning their surroundings. Suddenly, a beam of harsh, artificial light spears through the darkness. They both freeze. Up ahead, a patrol of heavily armed soldiers emerges, wearing the insignia of a faction Kane recognizes from off-world intelligence. Mercenaries or perhaps slavers, their rifles glowing with plasma charges. They move in formation, scanning the jungle for movement. He feels a twinge of alarm. They're after Sarya, no doubt. Possibly after him, too. She presses a finger to her lips, her gaze never leaving the intruders. One soldier barks, "Spread out! She has to be near!" The voice is amplified by a helmet speaker, echoing among the thick trunks. Kine's pulse pounds. He can almost feel Sarya's contempt radiating. He knows she could tear them apart if she chooses, but the odds are still stacked. 10 mercenaries. Plasma rifles, maybe heavier support lurking behind. Sarya inches backward, trying to melt further into the undergrowth. He mirrors her movement, mindful not to snap a twig or shuffle leaves too loudly. The group moves closer, the bright beams stabbing at the darkness. Kyne can see the reflection in Saria's eyes, that molten gold glint. She's itching to strike. He tightens his grip on his knife, aware that a head-on confrontation would be suicidal, but also feeling that primal rush that always precedes battle. The mercenaries pass mere feet away, scanning the gloom. Then one of them halts. "Wait. I see." The soldier never finishes. In a blink, Saria launches forward, too fast to track. She crashes into him, her blade flashing. Kyne jolts into action, rushing another soldier before they can fire. It's chaos. Plasma bolts scorch the night. Kyne ducks behind a trunk, letting bark explode where energy blasts strike. Saria is a shadow among them, slashing, twisting, evading. The mercenaries shout in confusion, struggling to pin her down. One soldier zeroes in on Kane's position, rifle muzzle glowing. Kane lunges, driving his knife into the man's arm, forcing the shot wide. The forest floor ignites in green flame where the bolt lands, sending up plumes of smoke. Kane rips the rifle from the soldier's grip and smashes the butt into his helmet, dropping him. He glances over to see Saria half buried under two grappling mercenaries, their combined weight pressing her into the mud. Her ears flatten and a snarl twists her lips. Kyne reacts without thought, sprinting across the small clearing. With a savage elbow, he knocks one soldier aside. Saria seizes the opening, ramming her blade into the second man's chest. He collapses with a gurgle. She springs back up, covered in mud and blood, eyes wild. Another merc goes down in a shriek of searing plasma from a crossfire mishap. The remaining few scramble for cover, panicked. Before they can regroup, Saria tears through them, moving in a blur of lethal precision. Kyne supports her assault, taking down anyone aiming in her direction. Within minutes, the clearing is silent, except for the crackle of small fires and the choking gasps of the wounded. They stand amidst the chaos, weapons still poised, adrenaline spiking. Saria whirls on him, panting. For a split second, he thinks she might attack him too. So frenzied is the bloodlust in her gaze. But then she exhales, controlling the surge. The forest smells of burnt ozone, charred vegetation, and coppery blood. Bodies lie crumpled in unnatural poses. Saria's chest heaves. Kyne finds himself breathing in tandem, matching her ragged rhythm. Their gazes lock. It's the first moment he notices something new. Beneath the rage, there's a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, as if she revels in the shared violence. It resonates with him on a level he's not comfortable admitting. He's fought countless battles, but none as simultaneously terrifying and intoxicating as this. He wipes sweat from his brow, feeling a smear of ash along his skin. He checks the soldier at his feet, a quick glance. The man is gone. No point lingering. Saria crouches beside the man she stabbed, yanking her blade free with a sickening squelch. She wipes the blood on the nearest patch of foliage, then looks up at Kane. "We're not alone," she says. "There'll be more." He nods, scanning the perimeter. She adds, "Next time, stay out of my way." There's no real venom in her tone, more like a reflex. He gives her a tight-lipped stare, choosing not to argue. Together they vanish back into the jungle, leaving the carnage behind. Hours pass, or maybe just a frantic blur of time as they weave through the undergrowth. They fight off smaller predators, climbing to higher ground when the canopy breaks. Rain starts to drizzle, turning the soil into sludge, weighing down vines and leaves. Exhaustion gnaws at Kyne, but he refuses to stop. Saria leads, forging a path that seems to wind deeper into the planet's heart. Finally, she halts at the edge of a massive ravine. An ancient stone structure spans the gap, a broken bridge, crumbling with age. Far below, luminescent rivers swirl, their glow casting eerie patterns on the cavern walls. She turns to him, water dripping off her tangled hair. "We cross. The place I'm taking you lies beyond." He eyes the precarious remains of the bridge. Massive chunks are missing, and the rock looks unstable. "That thing looks like it could collapse if we breathe on it wrong," he mutters. She snorts, stepping onto the cracked stone. "Then don't breathe." Each step she takes, pebbles tumble into the ravine, echoing far below. Kane follows, carefully distributing his weight, ignoring the pounding of his heart. The bridge sways under their combined mass. He keeps his eyes focused on her form, the shape of her shoulders, the way her ears pivot to gauge every creak. Halfway across, a large chunk of stone breaks free behind them, tumbling into the abyss. They freeze as vibrations ripple through the entire structure. Sarya holds out an arm. He stops, balancing on the balls of his feet. For a long moment, neither moves, then she continues, lighter this time, placing each foot with deliberate caution. By the time they reach the far side, the tension has coiled so tightly in Kane's gut he can hardly breathe. She doesn't pause to let him catch his breath, though. She plunges into the thick ferns ahead, forcing him to push on. Finally, they arrive at a clearing surrounded by twisted roots and enormous pillars of stone. She halts, pressing a hand against a carved symbol in the rock. A faint glow appears, scanning her palm. A hidden door grinds open, revealing a chamber lit by flickering torches of bluish flame. He steps in after her, warily noticing the advanced technology meshed with primitive design. The door slides shut, sealing them inside. Sarya turns, her expression unreadable. "You've proven you can handle yourself," she says. It's almost a concession. He's about to respond when she points to a corner. "There's a supply chest there, bandages, patches, whatever you need to fix yourself up." Her voice is still more command than courtesy. He tenses, not liking how easily she orders him around. But the burn of plasma grazes on his arm, convinces him not to resist the small mercy. As he moves toward the chest, she watches him, those ears twitching again, picking up every shift of cloth, every ragged inhale. He rummages through the chest, finding a medic kit with alien script. The contents are somewhat familiar: coagulants, antiseptics. He silently works on the cut near his elbow. As he does, he can feel her gaze on him, evaluating. He ignores the prickle of awareness that sets his nerve endings alight. She leans against the wall, that graceful silhouette a constant reminder of how dangerous she is. Eventually she speaks, her voice echoing in the quiet space. "What's your name, human?" He stiffens. It occurs to him that she's the first to ask in days. No one else survived long enough to care. "Kane," he says flatly, wrapping a bandage around his arm. She tilts her head. "Kane." She tests the name on her tongue, as if tasting the shape of it. Then she gives a short nod. "I'm Sarya." It's the first time she's offered any personal detail. He glances up, meeting her gaze. "So you are the DEATHWORLDER people talk about." She bares her teeth in a grin that's less friendly and more challenging. "That's what they call me." She shifts, crossing her arms under her chest, eyes roving over him. "But we both know you're not here just because of a name." He doesn't answer, focusing on tying the bandage off. The truth is messy. Revenge, a mission, curiosity. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't drawn in by the tales of an unstoppable alien war maiden. Sarya's presence is as addictive as it is lethal, but he's not going to spill that. Not after. Only a few hours of uneasy truce. She arches a brow, then turns to check a small console built into the wall. Holographic readouts flicker, displaying encrypted maps, energy signatures, and strange symbols. He steps closer, curiosity piqued. "A thermal reading of the sector," she explains. "Those mercenaries won't be the last. This entire planet's about to become a war zone. They're hunting me, and your people, whoever they are, won't be far behind." He stiffens at the mention of his people, but says nothing. She flicks a control, zooming in on a cluster of red dots drifting through the holographic jungle. More of them, possibly heavy artillery. He exhales slowly. Another firefight might be imminent, and they're both exhausted from the night's trials. In the flickering light, her features look sharper, her ears at attention. A fine tremor runs through him as their eyes lock. He can't deny the pull between them. It's not softness. He doesn't want to hold her close and whisper tender nonsense. It's something fiercer, primal. A collision of wills that makes his blood pound. She seems to sense it too, because her posture grows taut. She looks ready to pounce, whether in violence or something else. Neither speaks of it. He gestures at the readout. "We can't fight an entire army on our own." She doesn't blink. Speak for yourself. The corner of his mouth quirks involuntarily, a flicker of grim amusement. How you have a plan, then? Her eyes narrow. We draw them in, pick them off, use the jungle, my territory, my rules. Her confidence is absolute, and he doesn't doubt she could slaughter countless foes, but an entire battalion. He's not sure. Still, what choice does he have? He nods, stepping back. Fine. We'll do it your way. She tilts her head, appraising him. For now, she amends, almost as if she can read his reluctance. He hates to admit that he needs her, but the planet is lethal, and she knows how to survive here. Meanwhile, she needs his muscle, his training, and possibly his knowledge of advanced tactics. It's a partnership born of necessity, but the tension threatens to tear it apart at any moment. They settle into the chamber for a brief respite. Outside, the storm intensifies. Rain patters against the hidden roof, leaking through cracks to form steady drips. The bluish torches flicker, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Kine sits on a cold slab, arms on his knees, listening to the hiss of wind. Satya paces, restless. Each time she passes near him, he feels an electric jolt. She doesn't look at him directly, but her ears flick in his direction as if tracking every breath. Eventually, she stops and stares at him. Your squad tried to kill me, she says suddenly, voice cutting through the quiet. He tenses, recalling the mission data. She's not wrong. Multiple attempts to capture or eliminate the DEATHWORLDER failed each time. She continues, her tone harsh. Were you part of that? Are you here to finish what they started? He meets her gaze squarely. I'm here because I don't leave. A job undone. It's all he says. The muscle in her jaw clenches, her eyes filled with suspicion. Yet she doesn't attack. Maybe she's too tired, or maybe there's a flicker of understanding in her that this alliance is necessary. The minutes crawl by. Neither one truly sleeps. Dawn comes like a slow unveiling of light through cracks in the structure. She deactivates the bluish torches, letting natural illumination spill in. Cain stands stretching stiff muscles. His wound throbs, but the alien medkit's compounds have numbed most of the pain. Saria glances at him. Her expression is neutral, but the tension in the set of her shoulders hasn't faded. She gestures at the door. Time to move. She leads him deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the structure. The corridors are carved from stone, etched with glyphs he can't decipher. Faint lights flicker along the walls, indicating some ancient power source is still active. Occasionally, she stops at a junction and checks another hidden console. He follows, uneasy. He wonders who built this place and why it's abandoned, but he knows better than to pepper her with questions. She's not in the mood to explain her secrets. Eventually, they emerge onto a platform overlooking a massive subterranean cavern. Far below, waterfalls glow an ethereal blue as they cascade into dark pools. The air is cool here, a stark contrast to the steamy jungle above. She points to a spiral walkway carved into the rock, leading down to the water's edge. We can reach an underground river. It'll take us close to where the mercenaries are camped. He nods, somewhat impressed by the scale of it all. You know this place well, he observes. She ignores the statement, already moving. As they descend, the roar of the waterfalls drowns out most other sounds. Saria presses a button on her device, scanning the environment. He watches droplets cling to her skin, notices how her ears shift, scanning for threats in every direction. Piad strikes him again how alien she is, and yet how alive, how fierce. The sense of unrelenting attraction sparks again, unwelcome but undeniable. He can't indulge it, not when she might slit his throat the moment he lets his guard down. But ignoring it is getting harder. At the base of the cavern, they step onto a slick ledge. The glowing waterfalls surge mere yards away, lighting their path with shimmering reflections. Saria kneels beside a complex mechanism, part ancient stone, part advanced tech. She adjusts something, and an archway opens, revealing a small craft. Tethered to the rock, it's shaped like a slender canoe made of some black alloy powered by an energy coil. Without waiting for his opinion, she steps onto it, beckoning him to follow. He hesitates only a moment before climbing aboard. The craft hums softly, lurching as it disengages from the moorings. They drift into the underground river, the current strong. Saria steers deftly with a handheld console, guiding the vessel through shadowed tunnels. Strange glowing algae clings to the cavern walls, illuminating the water with a ghostly radiance. It's eerily beautiful. They pass silent rock formations that look like teeth jutting from the darkness. He wonders how many hidden passages and secret chambers lie in these depths. She seems to know exactly where to go, navigating labyrinthine twists with practiced ease. Minutes stretch into an hour, the monotonous rush of water lulling them into a tense silence. He can't stop his mind from drifting to the near-cataclysmic battles they've already survived. The image of her fighting in the clearing, hair wild, eyes blazing, replays in his head. There's a part of him that respects her skill, admires her lethal beauty. And there's another part that's distinctly aware of how easily she could kill him. That double-edged thrill keeps his senses razor-sharp. The tunnel widens into a vast subterranean lake. The craft glides onto a sandy bank. Saria hops out, scanning the gloom. He follows, stepping onto the shore. A rocky ramp leads upward, dimly, lit by a single crack in the cavern roof through which faint daylight spills. She points. "Climb, then we'll be close to their camp." They trudge up, boots slipping on loose gravel. Halfway up, a boulder shifts above them. Kain's instincts flare. He yells, "Move!" They dive aside just as a landslide of rocks crashes down, sending dust billowing. Saria coughs, brushing grit from her hair. He wipes debris from his face, eyes narrowed. Was that a natural collapse, or something triggered by watchers above? She seems to have the same question. With a silent nod, they press on. Emerging through the fissure in the rock, they find themselves at the edge of the jungle again, though this part is different, mist-shrouded, full of twisted trees with spiked branches. The air smells stale, like stagnant water. They creep forward, until they hear the unmistakable hum of machinery. A large encampment sprawls in a clearing, bristling with floodlights and perimeter fences. Soldiers patrol in pairs, plasma rifles at the ready. At the center stands an imposing fortress of prefabricated metal walls, likely where the commanding officers stay. Kain grimaces. It looks heavily guarded. Saria crouches, tailing her fingers over a small device that displays the red dots from earlier. "They're mustering a full squadron," she mutters, voice tight. "They're not just after me, it seems. They plan to take this world for themselves." Her ears flatten in anger. He eyes the guards. "So, what's your plan?" She flicks him a glance, stands, and slinks closer to the perimeter, testing how close she can get without triggering alarms. He follows, though every instinct says, this is suicide. They pause behind a thick trunk. She lowers her voice. "We create confusion, sabotage their power grid, pick them off when they're blind. Then we find their commander." Her gaze sharpens. "And we make sure they never dare set foot here again." He nods slowly. "Bold." She smirks. "I've done worse." Then she hands him a small charge, alien tech shaped like an orb of swirling energy. "Set this on their generator. It'll short out their defenses. I'll handle the sentries." He doesn't argue. They slip into the undergrowth, circling wide around the camp. Guards occasionally pass, shining flashlights into the shadows. Each time Saria freezes, pressing him down into the foliage. He feels the press of her body, the searing warmth along his back. Her breath fans against his neck, sending a prickle of sensation down his spine. He clenches his jaw, ignoring it. Eventually, they reach a chain-link fence rigged with motion sensors. Saria motions for Kain to stay put. With astonishing agility, she leaps and clambers over the fence without setting off the alarm. It's mesmerizing. The precision of her movement, the silent landing on the other side. She waves him onward. He attempts to mimic her stealth, nearly failing when the fence rattles. He stills, heart hammering. Seconds pass, but no alarm sounds. Relief floods him, and he drops to the ground beside her. They creep through the camp, ducking behind crates and half-assembled vehicles. Soldiers move about, oblivious to the danger mere feet away. Finally, they spot the large generator humming behind a reinforced barrier. One guard stands watch, scanning the area. Saria gestures to Kain. He nods. She moves in a blur, distracting, the guard with a whispered taunt slipping around behind him. The guard turns, startled. Before he can yell, Saria's blade is at his throat. A quick slice and he collapses soundlessly. Kyne sets the charge on the generator's access panel, remembering her instructions. He primes it, then glances at Saria. She signals for them to leave, but footsteps approach. Two soldiers, mid-conversation, head straight for them. Kyne tenses. They duck behind the generator. The soldiers pause. "You hear something?" one asks. The other shakes his head. "Probably the wind. Let's move." They continue on. Kyne's pulse pounds. He catches Saria's eye. She presses a small remote, and the orb's lights wink out, signifying a timed activation. They slip away, sprinting back through the maze of supply crates. Just as they reach the fence line, a brilliant flash illuminates the night. The generator explodes in a burst of electrical discharge, plunging the camp into chaos. Floodlights flicker, alarms. Blashy soldiers shout in confusion. The perimeter defenses spark and fail. In the pandemonium, Saria leaps the fence again, landing in a crouch. Kyne follows. The two of them vanish into the dark jungle, hearts racing. Far behind, the mercenaries scramble to restore power, but the sabotage has done its job. Saria glances at Kyne. He nods. Phase 1 complete. But as they maneuver through the dense foliage, panic grips the camp and they hear gunfire. The mercenaries are shooting at shadows, paranoid. Saria grins, baring her teeth in satisfaction. He notices how her chest rises and falls, the flush across her cheeks. She's exhilarated. Against his better judgment, he finds it contagious. They move to higher ground, circling the camp to find a vantage point from which to pick off key targets. Saria leaps onto a low branch, scanning with a small scope. She points out a cluster of officers gathering near an armored vehicle. Kyne steadies his rifle, pilfered from the earlier ambush, and lines up a shot. Adrenaline surges. He can sense her presence behind him, the subtle heat of her body, the soft rustle of her breath. For a moment it all feels too intimate for a battlefield, but the shot must be taken. He exhales, squeezes the trigger, and one officer drops. Saria exhales a hushed sound of approval. The rest scatter, no doubt terrified, cut off from their defenses. As night deepens, they launch hit-and-run attacks, sowing confusion and terror. The once organized mercenary force unravels. The tension between Kyne and Saria escalates with every kill, every near miss, every time they press together in the undergrowth to avoid detection. Eventually the mercenaries regroup, but their numbers are severely diminished. The fortress stands as their last stronghold. Saria indicates a hidden approach near a supply depot. "You sure about this?" Kyne murmurs. She smirks, resting a hand on his shoulder, leaning in so close he can smell the blood and sweat mixed with her natural, intoxicating aroma. "Don't tell me you're afraid," she whispers. He scowls, ignoring the spike of arousal that rushes through him at her closeness. "I don't do fear," he growls. She brushes past him, tailing the perimeter. He tries to refocus on the mission, but every nerve in his body seems attuned to her. They approach the fortress walls. The gates are sealed, but Saria locates a vent-like structure near the foundation. She pries it open, motioning for Kyne to follow. The passage is cramped, reeking of damp metal and decay. She crawls ahead, agile. He follows, face inches from the curve of her hips. The forced proximity only magnifies the tension that's been building. Sweat beads on his forehead, not only from exertion, but the awareness of her scent, the tight space, the shared breath. She glances back over her shoulder, eyes gleaming. "Keep moving," she hisses. He nods, feeling heat coil in his gut. Their progress is slow, punctuated by the clang of metal as they navigate the duct. Eventually, they reach an interior grate that opens into a storage room. She peeks through, then slides the grate aside. The room is empty. She drops down silently, motioning him to follow. They land on cool metal flooring, the sound barely audible above the hum of emergency lighting. The fortress's power is still spotty, lights flickering. They slip into a hallway. Saria points left, indicating footsteps. They hug the wall as a pair of guards pass. She readies her blade, but they don't spot her. Once the guards vanish, she exults softly, glancing at Kane. The tension in her gaze suggests she's enjoying this as much as he is, an odd mixture of survival, adrenaline, and some undeniable spark that crackles whenever they lock eyes. As they venture deeper, they hear distant shouting, the bark of commands, the clang of metal doors. They flatten themselves against a corridor wall, listening. A commanding voice booms. "Hold this position. The DEATHWORLDER is in the facility. Shoot on sight." Kine and Saria exchange a look. She smirks, lips curling in a silent challenge, as if to say, "Let them try." He nods grimly. This is her domain, even here. They stalk closer to the command center, guided by the faint glow of screens. Through a wide doorway, they see an imposing figure in ornate armor, flanked by more guards. The commander. On a console display, red dots and swirling lines represent the planet's terrain. Kine's mind races. This must be the man coordinating the assault. Taking him out could cripple the mercenaries' operations. Saria's grip tightens on her blade. He can practically feel her eagerness to strike, but the guards pose a serious threat. He scans the room, counting at least 6. 2 near the entrance, 2 patrolling the back, 2 flanking the commander. The slightest misstep could be lethal. Saria glances at him, raising an eyebrow. He nods once, understanding her meaning. They attack together. Her plan is straightforward, as always: ambush, kill quickly, cause chaos. He can't deny the thrill that zips down his spine. The old part of him that yearns for direct confrontation stirs. He sets his rifle to a low whine, then creeps behind a crate near the entrance. She positions herself on the other side, tensing like a coiled spring. On a silent count, she makes her move. She darts into the open, a ghost of motion. The guards jerk in alarm. Kine takes the shot, dropping the 2 at the door before they can react. Saria lunges at the flanking guards, weaving past their clumsy attempts to pin her down. Her blade flashes, opening a wide gash in one soldier's chest. The second guard manages to raise his rifle, but Kane's next burst claims him. The commander stands at the console, stunned. He fumbles for his weapon. Saria leaps onto the console, pivoting to slash at him, but the man ducks with surprising speed, countering with a heavy sidearm that discharges a pulse of energy. She dodges, the bolt sizzling past her ear. Kane rushes forward, tackling the commander to the ground. They crash in a heap, armor clanging. The commander swings the butt of his gun, striking Kane's bandaged wound. Pain explodes in his arm. He roars but doesn't let go, delivering a savage punch to the commander's helmet. Saria drops down, pressing her blade to the commander's throat. The man freezes, fear evident in his eyes. Kane staggers up, cradling his throbbing arm. She eyes him, then turns her gaze on the cowering officer. "Call off your men," she hisses. He sputters, I can't. They'll kill me." She sneers. "Then I'll kill you." The edge in her voice is terrifying. A small part of Kane wonders if he should intervene, but he doesn't. The commander's eyes dart between them, measuring his odds. Defeat lines his features. He taps, an earpiece muttering an order to stand down. An uneasy quiet settles over the fortress. Alarms still flash, but the sounds of active pursuit fade. Saria keeps the blade pressed to the commander's neck. "Tell them to leave this planet," she demands. He hesitates. She applies pressure. Blood beads on his skin. "Now." The man's voice trembles as he speaks into his comm, instructing all mercenary forces to retreat. They watch him, verifying the transmissions on the console. Gradually, the dots on the holographic map begin to disperse. When she's satisfied, Saria knocks him out with a swift blow to the head. He slumps, unconscious. Kine breathes heavily, eyes locked on her. The mission is done, or at least the biggest threat is neutralized. She looks at him, and the raw intensity in her gaze staggers him. Something about this shared triumph stokes a fever in the air, the culmination of all the tension that's been building. He can almost taste the adrenaline surging through her veins. She steps toward him, chest heaving, blade still slick with blood. There's no softness in her expression, only a fierce hunger, a challenge. He realizes he wants it just as much. His breath catches. She advances another step, close, enough he can feel the warmth of her skin. 1,000 warnings flicker in his mind, but they're drowned out by the thunder of his pulse. Neither can deny what's roiling beneath the surface. It's not gentle and it's not sweet, but it's inevitable, a primal collision of equals. Her lips part, and she grips the front of his shirt, yanking him closer. He feels her breath on his mouth, sees the tension in every line of her body. And he knows. This is war expressed in another form. She drags him in, crushing their mouths together in a bruising kiss. There's no tenderness. It's an assault, a claiming. He meets her force with his own, every muscle taut. Their teeth scrape and he tastes blood, maybe hers, maybe his. She growls low in her throat, tangling her fingers in his hair. The moment is raw, all the repressed violence and magnetism spilling over. He pins her against the console, ignoring the throbbing in his arm. Her blade clangs to the floor. Her nails rake across his back, urging him closer, deeper. He can't. Think beyond the pounding in his head and the scorching heat of her body. They break apart for a gasping second, eyes locked, chests heaving in unison. She stares at him, wild, feral, and there's no doubt she could kill him as easily as she kisses him. But in this sliver of time, they choose each other. A sudden crash from the corridor jerks them back to reality. They spin, panting, weapons at the ready. A pair of mercenaries staggers in, battered and wide-eyed. Kine fires without hesitation, taking them down. Saria curses softly. The fortress is still active. They can't linger, no matter how potent the attraction. She snatches up her blade, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, then darts toward the exit. Kane follows, adrenaline still thrumming. Outside, the fortress is in disarray, but the soldiers are retreating as ordered, albeit chaotically. They pick their way through rubble and scattered gear, occasionally dispatching stragglers. Eventually, they slip out a side exit, emerging into the night air. The jungle hush wraps around them like a shroud. They run, not speaking, neither acknowledging the volcanic tension that flared between them moments ago. Only when they reach a safe distance do they stop, leaning against an enormous tree trunk. He tries to catch his breath, mind still spinning. She stands beside him, cheeks flushed, lips swollen from their clash. For a moment it's quiet, but charged. He wants to say something, but no words come. She just looks at him, eyes half-lidded, ears flicking. "We're not done," she says finally, her voice a low rasp. He knows she doesn't just mean the mission. His heart pounds at the implication, but she pulls away, scanning the darkness, searching for potential threats. The A. Planet might be rid of most mercenaries, but it's still a dangerous place. He nods, ignoring the conflicting storm of emotions swirling inside him. Survival first. Then whatever it is they've started between them. The next day dawns bright and hot, insects buzzing in the thick air. They pick through abandoned camps, collecting supplies, ensuring no stragglers remain. Their alliance is as tense as ever, no gentle hand-holding or shared smiles. Instead, they trade barbed remarks and sideway glances, yet an undercurrent of unspoken heat lingers, binding them more tightly than words ever could. When they cross, another rickety bridge, she reaches for his arm instinctively, steadying him. The fleeting contact sends a jolt through them both. She snatches her hand back, scowling, as if angry at herself for the reflex. They press on. Over time, fatigue sets in. The conflict may be mostly over, but the planet itself remains hostile. They fend off prowling beasts, endure sudden storms, struggle through tangles of razor-sharp vines. Each ordeal brings them physically closer, forced to rely on each other in a way that's both exhilarating and maddening. When they pause for rest in the cover of massive roots that arch overhead, they find themselves drawn together, despite trying to maintain distance. She collapses onto a mossy ledge, rubbing her calves. He slides down beside her, wincing at the ache in his muscles. Their breathing mingles in the still air. Neither speaks for a long minute. Then she snorts, softly. "You look half dead." He angles a glance at her. "I've been worse." A cocky edge to his tone. She smirks, but there's a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Well, if you die now, I'll have to drag your corpse around. That would be inconvenient." He can't help a low chuckle. "Would you miss me that much?" Her eyes sharpen. "Don't flatter yourself." But there's a pulse beneath. Her words that betrays her. She shifts, turning away, but not before he catches the slight tremor in her shoulders. Are they trembling from exhaustion or something else? He can't resist the urge to push further. "We shared a moment back there," he says quietly, referencing the kiss that still burns in his memory. She stiffens. For a second, he thinks she'll lash out. Instead, she merely murmurs, "It doesn't change anything." His chest tightens, though he's not sure why. He wasn't expecting a confession of love, but her dismissive tone irks him more than it should. He grits his teeth, letting the subject drop. They rest in tense silence, focusing on regaining strength. The sense that they're dancing around, something bigger than themselves remains, unspoken yet ever present. Night falls again and they make a makeshift camp beneath an overhang. No fire. The glow of the fungal vines offers enough light. Cain checks the perimeter, while Saria sets up a low-power energy field. The hum envelops them, a bubble of relative safety in this savage landscape. She lies down, arms behind her head, eyes on the canopy of twisted branches overhead. He settles, nearby, trying to find a comfortable position on the rough ground. Minutes stretch, accompanied by the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Finally, she breaks the silence. "You humans, you have such strange convictions." Her voice is quiet, almost thoughtful. He props himself up on an elbow. "We do." She glances at him. "Yes. You come to a planet like this expecting to conquer or exploit it, never considering that something might fight back harder." There's no bitterness in her tone, more like a resigned observation. He exhales, rolling onto his back, to stare at the alien sky. The overhead leaves part, revealing a glimpse of stars. He wonders how many times she's been forced to defend this place, if she's always been alone in it. "I didn't come here to exploit anything," he says finally, recalling the original mission. It was about vengeance and proof of capability. Not necessarily conquest, but it's a thin distinction and he knows it. Saria doesn't reply. The hush returns. At some point, exhaustion overtakes them. He closes his eyes, drifting on the edge of sleep. In that vulnerable moment, he feels movement beside him. Saria shifts closer, her warmth penetrating the chill of the night. Her scent envelops him, stirring embers of that earlier fire. He doesn't move, uncertain if she's fully aware of how close she's come. Then, her arm brushes his, and she exhales softly, almost a sigh. Before he can process the meaning, he slips into a restless sleep. Dawn brings a veil of mist and the calls of odd avian creatures. He stirs awake to find Saria already standing, scanning the horizon. She glances down at him. Any trace of softness is gone, replaced by her usual guarded demeanor. "We should move," she says. He rubs his eyes, stifling a groan as he rises. Muscles protest from the countless battles, the grueling pace. Still, he pushes through. They dismantle their minimal camp and resume the trek. Time blurs. They encounter fewer hostiles now. The mercenaries have either withdrawn or lie dead. The planet, though still dangerous, seems quieter. Late afternoon finds them at the edge of a high cliff, overlooking a valley choked with greenery. Steam rises in the distance. From hot springs, shimmering in the sunlight, Saria halts, crossing her arms, ears flicking. "If you keep going that way, eventually you'll reach a region that might have a functioning off-world transmitter," she says. Her tone is neutral, but he senses an undercurrent. He steps up beside her, surveying the valley. "And if I do?" She shrugs, not looking at him. "You can call your people, get off this planet." He studies her profile. A pang seizes his chest at the thought of leaving, which is ridiculous. He came here to stop her, or at least prove something to a faceless authority. But now everything's changed. The conflict has ended, or at least cooled. The vendetta that once fueled him feels hollow. He finds himself torn. The rational side of him knows returning to a more familiar life is the smart choice. The other part, the part that's been awakened by her presence, balks at the idea of never seeing her again. A hush falls between them. Finally, he says, "You don't need me here anymore." It's not a question, she inhales. "I don't." Her gaze flicks to him. "But that doesn't mean I want you gone." The admission is so quiet he almost thinks he imagined it. She adds, This world isn't meant for humans. You could survive if you're lucky, but there's always another threat lurking. He can't quite contain the dryness in his laugh. Luck's not something I rely on. She tilts her head, ear flicking. I noticed. Another silence. A thick wave of unspoken tension passes between them. There's no more immediate war to fight, no reason for them to remain side by side. Yet they stand there, neither moving away. Finally he turns slightly, meeting her gaze. He sees uncertainty flicker across her features, a vulnerability he never thought she was capable of. Saria, he begins, voice low. She cuts him off by stepping into his space, gripping the back of his neck. Her eyes are fierce and her breathing is unsteady. She doesn't kiss him this time. Instead, she just holds him there, foreheads almost touching, as if waging an internal battle. He can practically feel her heart hammering. He lifts a hand, resting it on her waist. Slowly she relaxes, her body sagging against him. For a moment they stand like that, suspended between wanting and resisting. The tension finally snaps. She crushes her mouth to his again, and this time there's a shade more desperation. He meets her hunger, hands sliding along her sides. She tears away, panting, only to press her forehead to his collarbone. The vulnerability in the gesture floors him. He doesn't speak. He just wraps an arm around her, pulling her closer. She trembles slightly, and he realizes that for all her ferocity, she's never had anyone to trust. The moment feels unbearably intimate. Eventually, she pulls back, ears flattened in self-consciousness. She tries to muster her usual bravado, but her voice shakes. Don't think this means you own me. He actually manages a small smile. I wouldn't dare. She nods, seeming satisfied, but the tension in her posture lingers. This is uncharted territory for both of them. The planet itself seems to hold its breath, as if waiting to see what they'll do next. They descend into the valley together, side by side, forging a path through the dense foliage. The day grows hotter, sweat slicking their bodies. Occasionally they exchange glances, uncertain how to navigate this shift in their dynamic. But they move in a tandem that wasn't there before, a synchronized awareness of each other's presence. When they reach a natural spring, she motions for them to stop. We can rest here, she says, her voice subdued. He nods, dropping his gear. His arms ache, and the bandage around his elbow is sweat-soaked. She kneels at the spring's edge, scooping cool water to drink. He does the same, relishing the relief. After a moment, she slides off her minimal gear and steps into the shallows, letting the water lap at her ankles. He watches, cautious. She glances back, an invitation in her eyes. Without a word, he wades in, the water swirling around his calves. They stand there a few feet apart, letting the sun warm them from above and the water soothe from below. He notices how the droplets cling to her ears, how the tension seems to melt from her shoulders. The silence between them is somehow more peaceful now. The primal edge remains, but it's tempered by something deeper. He moves closer, watching her expression. She doesn't push him away. Instead, her eyes flutter shut, and she leans into him as he places a gentle hand on her waist. No words are spoken. They allow themselves a rare moment of quiet acceptance. They linger until the sun dips low, painting the sky in crimson and gold. When they step out, the hush remains, but it's no longer awkward. They camp near the spring. He starts to drift off to sleep, exhaustion overtaking him, when she quietly crawls over and settles against his side. Her fingers lightly trail the scar on his shoulder, a subtle, almost hesitant exploration. He says nothing, just lets her touch him, heart pounding with an unfamiliar warmth. Eventually her breathing slows and she falls asleep, trust blooming in this savage place. In the morning, the final phase of their journey seems inevitable. They trace a path that leads to higher ground. Soon they reach a vantage where they can see the transmitter tower in the distance, an old relic from a previous colonization attempt, its silhouette jagged against the sky. He knows that once they reach it, a signal can be sent. Possibly a shuttle could come, or reinforcements, or anything. She stands there, arms crossed, watching him carefully as if gauging his resolve. He exhales slowly, every step forward now feeling like a step away from her. Is that what he wants? Duty, reason, mission parameters say yes, but his instincts and something rawer say no. She shifts her weight, ears angled in subtle tension. You don't have to call them, she says quietly, as if reading his hesitation. He grimaces, torn. And if I don't? Her eyes flick over him. Then you're stuck here on a planet that kills most everything that lands. She tilts her head. With me. His chest tightens. The subtext is heavy in the air. He moves closer, resting a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin. You could leave too, he offers, though he's not sure if it's truly an invitation or a desperation. She shakes her head. This world is mine, she says, simply. I don't run. He nods, wrestling with the decision. Another swirl of silence. Eventually they continue toward the tower without another word. By midday they arrive at its base, a crumbling structure entwined with vines, half buried in rubble. A metal door stands ajar, rusted and squeaking in the breeze. They move inside, picking their way through debris, until they find the main control room. The consoles are ancient, covered in dust. Saria helps him clear a space. He powers up the system with a small portable generator, sparks flying as the old circuits hum to life. The screen flickers, revealing a battered interface. He types in a manual override, scanning for an available frequency. Saria stands behind him, arms folded. The tension in the room is palpable, every beep of the system a countdown to a choice he can't evade. Static crackles, then a faint connection. He glances over his shoulder at her. She meets his eyes, expression inscrutable, though her ears betray her inner conflict, swiveling back in agitation. He leans forward, pressing the transmit button. A moment's hesitation. Then, in a low voice, "This is Kain. If anyone's receiving, respond." Static. Another beep. A distant voice crackles through, barely audible. "Kain. Copy. You're alive?" He doesn't answer right away, glancing at Saria. She maintains a mask of indifference, but he knows her well enough now to sense the turmoil beneath. He exhales. "I'm alive," he says into the microphone. "Request pickup coordinates." There's a pause, then the voice acknowledges, telling him to stand by. He ends the transmission, heart hammering. It's done. They have his signal. If they come, they'll land. Then what? He rubs a hand over his face, turning to face Saria. "They'll be here in a day or so," he mutters. She nods, stepping, away, tension visible in the line of her spine. He follows, grabbing her wrist gently. She stops, not looking at him. The old impulses war with new feelings inside him, but the decision is made. I had to," he says, though he's not even sure if that's true. She finally meets his gaze. The raw vulnerability there shakes him more than any battle. But she lifts her chin, adopting a familiar defiant stance. "I know," she replies softly, "and I suppose I appreciate that you asked me to leave, but I can't. This is my home." Silence stretches, thick with unspoken emotion. He releases her wrist. Neither steps away. Their breathing sinks, hearts pounding in unison. He can't bear the thought of never seeing her again, yet he's set events in motion that will likely separate them. Outside, the planet continues its ruthless cycle, predator and prey clashing in the distance. In here, they stand at an impasse. Saria's gaze flicks to the tower entrance, then back to him. The next breath he takes is shaky. He steels himself, forging the words. "I'll leave with them," he says, voice low, "but that doesn't mean this has to end." It sounds naive, even to his own ears, but he's grasping at a fragile hope. She stiffens, ears twitching in confusion. "You propose some arrangement?" she asks warily. He shrugs, frustration lining his features. "We're from two different worlds, literally, but this doesn't have to be a goodbye." Her lips quirk bitterly. "Humans come, humans go. You'll forget me in a week." His jaw clenches. "I doubt that." Another fierce tension thrums between them, the kind that's led to collisions before. She swallows hard, searching his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" He exhales sharply, stepping into her space, resting a hand at her hip. "Because you're everything I never expected, and I can't just walk away." Her breath trembles, and for once, She doesn't hide behind sarcasm. "Then don't," she whispers. He's at a loss. "What about your world?" She lifts her shoulders. "I've lived alone here, fighting off everything that tried to claim it. If you want to stay, you'll have to learn to survive." He studies her, the swirl of possibilities rushing through his mind. He came here on a mission, bound by duty, fueled by rage. Now that rage is spent, replaced by a conflicting tide of desire and belonging. But it's not that simple. He can't just vanish without explaining himself to the outside universe. He has debts, allegiances, responsibilities. She reads the hesitation in his eyes and nods, stepping back. "You're free to go," she says, voice calmer than he expects. "If you return, you'll have to prove yourself again. This planet won't grant you mercy twice." There's a soft, bittersweet note in her tone that tugs at his chest. He reaches for her, and she lets him gather her in, pressing a tender kiss to her temple. It's a startlingly gentle gesture for them, so unlike their violent embraces. They wait at the tower for the rescue ship. The hours crawl. They share minimal conversation, but the silence is companionable, laced with an intimacy built from shared danger. Eventually the sound of engines echoes overhead, stirring the treetops. Lights cut through the canopy, and a vessel descends, thrusters blowing leaves and debris in all directions. Saria stands to the side, arms folded protectively, watching. As the ramp lowers, Kane looks at her one last time, imprinting the sight of her strong frame, her wild hair, her defiant stance. She watches him walk up the ramp, those ears flattened with tension, as if every muscle in her body fights the instinct to follow. At the threshold he pauses. The retrieval team waits, baffled by the scene. He doesn't explain. Instead he turns, meeting Saria's gaze. There's no dramatic farewell, no tears. Just a single nod that passes between them, a silent promise. That resonates with all they've experienced. Then he steps inside. The ramp closes, sealing him away from her world. The engines roar and the ship ascends, carrying him toward the distant stars. The moment stretches for Kane like an eternity. As the vessel breaks atmosphere, he presses a hand against a small window, peering at the shrinking planet below. Regret and resolve churn within him. He knows where his heart truly lies. Despite the swirling uncertainties, he's made a decision. He'll return, no matter what it costs. She gave him that opening, that tenuous hope. And Saria, down on the surface, feels the weight of the emptiness he's left behind, even as she stands tall, reclaiming her territory. She doesn't weep. She hunts, she fights, she survives. But a part of her counts the days, waiting to see if he'll prove his words more than fleeting nonsense. Time passes. In a settlement orbiting near the planet, Kane makes his reports, finalizes his mission logs. He deflects questions about the DEATHWORLDER's fate, claiming unconfirmed kills or reticent intel. Political entanglements swirl, but he navigates them with a single-minded focus, returning to Saria. He trades favors, calls in debts, acquires resources. The outside universe is messy and slow, full of bureaucracy that demands patience. Kane endures it all with uncharacteristic stoicism. Each day, he replays the memory of that last kiss, the feel of her nails biting into his back, the war cry. That shaped their bond. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Saria prowls the jungle, reclaiming ruined outposts from the mercenaries, driving off opportunists who dare to land. She keeps her ears pricked for any sign of an incoming vessel. At night, she sits by the flickering glow of her hidden technology, scanning frequencies, but she never admits aloud that she's waiting for him. Pride forbids such vulnerability. Still, her gaze sometimes drifts to the sky. Weeks later, a single craft slips through the atmosphere, landing in a clearing near the ravine where they first fought side by side. Saria watches from the shadows, blade ready, uncertain if it's friend or foe. Then the ramp lowers, and Kane emerges geared with supplies. He stands at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line, heart hammering. She steps out, feline ears alert, posture rigid. Their eyes lock. For a second, neither speaks. Then he takes a step forward, resting a hand on his weapon, not in threat, but as a symbol of acknowledgement. He knows how deadly she is. She tilts, her head, watching him. Finally, he says, "I came back." His voice shakes just a fraction. She exhales, shoulders relaxing almost imperceptibly. "So you did," she murmurs. He wants to move closer, to pull her into his arms, but he waits. She studies him, lips curving into that familiar smirk. "You sure you're ready for this planet?" His responding grin is grim and determined. "I can learn." She gives a low hum, stepping closer, each movement sinuous. When they're within reach, she lifts a hand to his chest, feeling the solid thump of his heart. "I'll teach you, human," she says softly, a challenge and a promise. He nods, covering her hand with his, a slow release of tension flooding his body. No. Further words are needed. They stand there, letting the jungle's humid air envelop them. This time, when they collide in a kiss, it's fierce, but underlined by something deeper. Surviving is only the beginning. Now they learn how to live. Together. He glances over his shoulder at the ship, thinking of the supplies he's brought, the time he'll spend forging a new place here. She notices, lips curling in amusement. "We won't need half of that," she warns, ears flicking as she eyes the crates. He laughs under his breath. "Let me fail a few times before you prove me wrong." The corner of her mouth lifts in a genuine smile. She takes his hand, leading him into the jungle's embrace. High above, the sky churns with alien weather, the same savage planet that nearly killed him once. But now it feels like a second chance, a new beginning. They vanish into the verdant landscape, footsteps merging. The jungle closes behind them, sealing them off from prying eyes, leaving only the echoes of their voices carried on the wind. Deep within the wilderness, they'll carve out a domain shaped by mutual respect, desire, and the promise of survival. In that raw primal terrain, their bond finds completion. And though the universe beyond remains wide and dangerous, the finality of this choice feels complete, as if it was always meant to be. The Deathworlder and the human, bound by conflict, cemented by passion, forging a future that neither could, have survived alone. The planet, once a symbol of death, now stands as their shared life. No cliffhangers, no regrets, only resolution, fierce and undeniable.